So this family vacation was a very ordinary family vacation, and that wasn't any different on Thursday, May 3rd. So that morning, over breakfast, Madeline had asked her father, "Why didn't you come and check on me and my brothers when we were crying last night?" And her parents thought this a little bit weird, but kind of just brushed it off at the time of maybe they had a nightmare, they woke up, they cried for a little bit, they went back to bed. Well, hey, howdy, hi. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to join me. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie, and I'm a witch. This over here is my teaching assistant, Andy, and today is Tuesday, and on my channel that means it is tea time and true crime. Today's tea is still an apple tea. We're going to be doing this apple cider vibe. And then today's true crime case is going to be the case of Madeleine McCann, which is a cold case. So if you don't like cases that are unsolved, definitely find another video because this one is a sad one and it is not solved as of November of 2023. If you're not interested in true crime, I completely understand. I do have two other series on my channel. On Sundays, I talk about cryptids, and on Mondays, I talk about history. So if that interests you at all, I definitely say check out those series. If you do ever wonder on what authority I talk about any of these topics with, unfortunately, I'm not currently in college, but when I get the chance to go back to college, I am a double major in history and criminology, and then I just kind of enjoy talking about cryptids. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. So Madeleine McCann was just 3 years old when her family took a vacation to Portugal in 2007. This trip consisted of Madeline, her parents, Kate and Jerry, and then her two younger twin siblings. Now, they also had some family friends with them, and these family friends brought their own children, and the adults were considered the Tapas 7, and I will explain why in a little bit. So this family vacation was a very ordinary family vacation, and that wasn't any different on Thursday, May 3rd. So that morning, over breakfast, Madeline had asked her father, "Why didn't you come and check on me and my brothers when we were crying last night?" And her parents thought this a little bit weird, but kind of just brushed it off at the time of maybe they had a nightmare, they woke up, they cried for a little bit, they went back to bed. However, looking back, Madeline's mother, Kate, thought it was just a little bit too weird and now considers that it might have been an omen or maybe even somebody having gone in to look at the children the night before, somebody who shouldn't have been there. So, brushing off this strange comment from Madeline, the family just decided to go about their vacation as normal. And so, the resort that they were staying at, they had apartments instead of like a hotel room, and this resort also had a daycare. So this daycare is where the parents dropped off all their kids so that they could go to lunch, and then they would come and collect them before they took them to the pool. And it was actually at the pool that we have the last known picture of Madeline taken. It's with her father Jerry and then her two brothers. So after they finished swimming, the kids were taken back to the daycare center for another few hours, and then their parents picked them up around 6, and Kate decided to take the kids back to the apartment while Jerry went to do a tennis lesson. About an hour later, around 7 p.m., the children were being put down for bed, and Madeline notably was wearing white and pink Eeyore pajamas, short sleeve, and she was laying next to her comfort blanket and her stuffed cat, Cuddle Cat. So after the children were put down for bed, the group of parents decided to go to a tapas restaurant down the street, which is why they get the name the Tapas 7. So Kate and Jerry are not included in that number, so there were 7 other adults present. But this restaurant was actually a bit of a walk away, so you had to take a public street and then go across or around the pool, and then it had the restaurant. And the table that they had booked was specifically reserved for them for the entirety of their stay because they realized that you could see a portion of the apartment from the table. You couldn't see the front door, but you could kind of see the top of the apartment. Now, the way that the McCann apartment was set up, the children were the closest bedroom to the front door. And so, not wanting to wake up their children coming in and out to check on them, the McCanns left the front door locked, but left the patio door unlocked. The reason for that is because the patio door only locked from the inside, and not wanting to wake up the children, if they left that door unlocked, they could slip in and out without making any noise. So the parents said that they were regularly checking on all of their children about every 30 minutes, and Jerry actually did the first check, and that was around 9 p.m. So when he went in, he said that the kids were all asleep and safe, but he did notice that it was a little bit weird because he thought that he had closed the door almost all the way to the kids' bedroom. However, when he went to check on them, the door was completely open. He thought it was a little bit weird, but maybe his wife had gone in and checked on them right before they left, and she accidentally left the door open. Not a big deal. So he went in and he gave him a little kiss on the head, and then whenever he left, he made sure that he closed the door so there was just a little bit of a gap open. And so on his way back to the dinner, Jerry had actually stopped to talk to another man on holiday, a British man, and that is when him and this man ran into Jane Tanner. Jane Tanner was going to check on her own daughter, and she was one of the Tapas 7. So Tanner is important because she said that around 9:15 she had seen a man carrying a young child across the street, and when she saw him, this man hadn't been far from the McCann apartment, kind of near the front door, so where Madeleine and her brother's bedroom would have been. The child in this man's arms was wearing sort of light pink pants, and they had little flowers around the cuff of the pants. Tana thought this was kind of similar to what Madeleine had been wearing, so she noted that the man was Caucasian. He was dark-haired, he seemed to be about 5'7", and he seemingly was European or Mediterranean in appearance, and she said that he didn't seem uncomfortable. He seemed uncomfortable carrying the child, but that he was kind of from around the area, it seemed. He was a local, not a tourist. So Tanner actually gave this eyewitness account to the police as soon as Madeleine was reported missing. However, they didn't initially believe her, and because Jerry and this other man on holiday had said that they didn't see a man, Tanner was assumed to have just made it all up. Scotland Yard, on the other hand, did believe that the sighting itself was real, that Tanner had made up the sighting. However, they were able to verify that another British family on holiday had just picked up their children from the daycare, and a father was carrying his little girl across the street to go to their own apartment, and this man was found, and he matched the description that Tanner had given, and this little girl, her PJs supposedly matched the description that Tanner had given. So rejecting Tanner's sighting as related to the abduction meant that they could focus on a different timeline. This timeline was brought forth by Mary and Martin Smith, and they had reported a sighting of something very similar to what Tanner had reported, but they didn't report it until May 26th of 2007, which is 23 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Mary and Martin Smith had been on vacation in Portugal from Ireland at the same time that the McCanns were there. And they did say something similar to Tanner's description. It was just later in the night. So they said that they saw this man at about 10 p.m. and he had been about 500 yards from the McCann apartment. And he was moving away from the apartment and towards the beach. And in his arms, he was carrying a little girl who they estimated to be around 3 or 4 years old. She was blonde-haired, fair-skinned, and that she had on these light-colored pajamas. And she didn't have any shoes on, just socks. The man himself was described as being in his late 30s. He was between 5'7" and 5'9", said to have kind of an average build, short brown hair, light-colored pants, and he seemed comfortable with the area, meaning he was more of a resident rather than a tourist, and they said that he appeared to be very uncomfortable with holding Madeleine. So jumping back into the actual timeline a bit, this is now around 9:30, and Kate was going to go check on the children. However, one of the other parents, Matthew Oldfield, one of the Tapas 7, actually offered to look in on Madeleine and her siblings when he went to check on his own children. So when Matthew got to the bedroom, he found that the door, once again, was wide open to the children's bedroom. However, he didn't hear anything, so he just kind of assumed the children are fine, and he didn't actually go into the room to verify that the children were still there. And this detail specifically made police suspicious of him, theorizing that maybe he did go into that bedroom, but he actually passed Madeleine out the window to the abductor. So around 10 p.m., Kate decided that she was going to go check on her own children this time, and she found that once again, this bedroom door was wide open. But whenever she kind of tried to pull it to close it, it just fully slammed. And that freaked her out a little bit, so when she opened the door, she realized that the window was open, and that had just been the wind blowing the door shut. So Kate went into the room to check on her children, and she saw Madeleine's bed, and her blanket and cuddle cat were there, but Madeleine was gone. So Kate did a very short search of the apartment, and then she ran back to the group and she screamed, "Madeleine's gone, someone's taken her." Around 10:10 p.m., Jerry had sent Matthew to go to the front desk to call the police, and then 20 minutes after that, the resort itself actually started their own missing child protocol. This meant that 60 staff members and guests began their search for Madeleine, assuming that maybe she had just wandered off. This group actually searched until 4:30 the next morning, And witnesses said that you could hear people calling out Madeleine's name from one end of Pride de Luz to the other end. So the resort actually acted faster than the police did. So 2 officers from Lagos, which is about 5 miles away, didn't actually arrive until an hour after the call. And so they got there at about 11:10, although they did immediately begin their search and they very quickly realized that they needed reinforcements. So they ended up calling in the Policia Judiciaria, or PJs, shortly after midnight, and the actual response time of the PJs is debated, but what is known that at 2 a.m. police dogs were brought to the resort. Unfortunately, these 2 dogs did not find anything, so at 8 a.m., 4 police search and rescue dogs were brought in, and at the police station, leave requests were being denied. Leave itself, you were being called back into the station. Off-duty officers were coming in, and they searched caves, sewers, wells, waterways, and the ruins around Pré de Luz. So they have this massive search effort going on, and there was a lot of mistakes made during this case, and everybody admitted that completely on their own. Border and Marine police were not immediately given Madeleine's description. No door-to-door searches were initially done. Highways and street surveillance was not collected in that area for the night of the disappearance. It took Interpol 5 days to issue a global missing persons report, and guests self-reported that no one had asked them any questions about that night. That's not the only issue though. The scene itself was also not properly handled. So the children's bedroom was not initially secured. However, when it was secured, police put a single strip of tape across the door without securing the rest of the apartment. This was around 3 a.m. and at least 20 people had been in and out of that room already, and it was then that the forensic team was sent in to collect evidence. So after this initial investigation, the landlord of the apartment was not renting out to anybody, but that only lasted for 1 month. And then people were allowed to rent the apartment again. However, that only lasted a brief time before the police sealed it once again, and then sent another team of dogs and forensic techs in to kind of look for evidence. This second attempt was not any better. Not only was the crime scene severely contaminated, but one of the officers specifically, who had gone to dust for prints on the windowsill, had not worn gloves or protective clothing while collecting the evidence, so it is completely unusable. So this is the Portuguese police. Eventually, the British police were sent over to Portugal, but they were not having any luck because the Portuguese police were very hostile towards them, believing that their country is a bad one. Whatever your belief is, it wasn't helpful in this situation when a little girl was missing. So that didn't help, but also Portugal is a little bit less advanced technologically. So in England, they're used to having a computerized database to look through, but Portugal, all they had was these paper records in boxes. The media coverage of this case was massive, and that's not a bad thing. So the family started the Madeleine Fund on May 15th, 2007, and just in the first 2 days, the site had over 58 million hits. This raised the money the family needed. They put Madeleine's picture on the front of magazines, they did media events around the world between May and June, they even met Pope Benedict XVI, and then a balloon release was organized so that balloons were set off in 300 cities across the world. However, not everybody kind of saw this as a good thing. It actually troubled a lot of people with how professional this all seemed. These parents didn't seem to be those grieving parents who didn't know what to do themselves. No, these parents were marketing, in Jerry's own words, their daughter, their missing child. They were going across the world doing press conferences, and they just didn't seem like they were grieving like a lot of people had assumed. And then you see the coverage, and Portugal had 384 articles published about Madeleine in just 1 year. And then if you search Madeleine's name in YouTube, you'd get 3,000 video results and over 7 million posts. So the first suspect of the case was actually a man named Robert Morat, and he was a 34-year-old British-Portuguese property consultant. At the time of Madeleine's abduction, he lived with his mother only 150 yards away from the McCann apartment. Interest in him as a suspect came when several people reported that he had kind of been asking about the case and just in an unprompted kind of way, just bringing it up randomly. The PJs ended up hiring him for a short amount of time to be a translator, and he said that he wanted to help because he himself had a daughter about Madeleine's age back home in England. So 3 friends of the McCanns that were with them on this vacation, a resort staff member, and then 2 other tourists, actually gave a statement that they had seen Marat near the McCann apartment around the time of the abduction. However, Marat and his mother both said that they were home during the abduction. So obviously the PJs didn't take this at face value and they conducted a search of the home. So they ended up searching the actual house itself. They drained the pool. They went through his cars, and then they took his computers, phones, and then any videos to see if those may contain some evidence. They also ended up bringing in search dogs as well as using radar guns to kind of search around the area. And then they went to talk with a couple of associates of Marat, and nothing was found. However, in 2008, one of the questioned associates set Marat's car on fire and then spray painted the word fala, which translates to speak, on the ground in red spray paint. It was about a year after Madeleine's disappearance that Marat was finally cleared as a suspect, and he actually went on to receive $600,000 in a settlement with the newspaper The Observer because of a libel the newspaper had been spreading. So the McCanns were actually also suspects themselves. As I stated earlier, people thought that they were going about the whole thing in a very professional way, more professionally than people expect grieving parents to be. For the first time we see the public questioning the McCanns' involvement, it was just a month after Madeleine's disappearance when a German reporter asked Kate and Jerry point blank, "Did you have something to do with your daughter's disappearance?" Towards the end of June, a weekly newspaper in Portugal called Sol published a 3,000-word article about how the McCanns were suspect. This article stated that they had officially been named, which at that time I do not believe they had been, and then they went on to point out some inconsistencies between the statements the McCanns gave. Other newspapers also got in on this action and started writing about the McCanns and their friends in less than favorable ways. They implied that the McCanns and their friends were swingers, that they had sedated the children regularly, and that they had all had this pact of silence around the disappearance of Madeleine. The inconsistencies that I mentioned that most articles focused on is the actual entrance to the apartment that Kate and Jerry made. So in the initial statement, Jerry said that he and Kate both entered through the locked front door. However, this changed, and now they both say that they had left the patio door unlocked, and that's how they were getting in and out of the apartment, rather than just using her cell phone or shouting out to the group. The other debate is about the blinds or the shutters in the kids' bedroom. So according to the PJs, the shutters can only be opened from inside due to the way that the blinds kind of lock and then the string being on the inside that you have to open the shutters with. However, Jerry said that you can open them from the outside, and he kind of said that the only way you could open the blinds was from the outside, and he learned that the night that Madeleine disappeared. So because of all these discrepancies, the PJs were suspicious. The PJs were most suspicious about Kate in particular, especially about her statement when she had run back to the group. It was something along the lines of, "They've taken her." And that's not a normal thing that a parent would say. And most people would say, "She's gone, my child is missing," not immediately jump to, "Somebody had to have taken her." So the PJs believe that this was kind of to set up a story of this abduction, that Kate was just setting it up as somebody took her and that's what you guys need to focus on. So the PJs really focused on her as a suspect, and they came up with the theory that something had happened to Madeleine in that apartment, whether it be an accident or on purpose. Madeleine ended up dead from it, and this was the cover-up for it. As most parents wouldn't, however, Kate and Jerry refused to give up on their search, even if they were suspects, and they had suggested to police that a South African former police officer named Daniel Krugel be brought in, and he had supposedly created a device called a matter orientation system. Now, this was a handheld device that could locate missing people based on a sample of their DNA. Now, most people don't believe this claim in the slightest. It's physically impossible. This device just does not exist. And Kate says that she understands that now, but at the time she was desperate to have anything work. So the PJs thought that this was some kind of ploy. However, Madeleine's eyelashes and hair were sent to Krugel, and so he went to Pré de Luce with his device. Of course, he did not find Madeleine, but he told the McCanns he had picked up a static signal on an area of the beach. So regardless of whether or not the McCanns had just been using Daniel, Portugal actually sent a letter to the British police asking for their help. So in response to this, the British police brought two highly trained dogs. So they brought Keela and Eddie. Keela is a forensics dog, and she could locate traces of human blood, and she'd alert her handlers by pointing her nose directly at the spot and freezing in place. Eddie is a cadaver dog, meaning that he finds human remains even if they're buried, burned, or have been in water. Eddie's signal, whenever he found something, was to bark, and he was trained to bark only if he scented a dead body. So they took the dogs to the beach where Krugel had claimed that he found a static signal, and they were unable to find anything. And they searched most of the beach, and they were still unable to find anything. The dogs were then taken to the McCann's apartment where they stayed during their vacation, and both dogs alerted behind the couch, and then Eddie alerted to the wardrobe in the parents' bedroom. They got a search warrant to search another home and a car rented by the McCanns shortly after Madeleine's disappearance. In the other house, Eddie had alerted to Cuddle Cat that had been sat in the living room, but that was really it, and Keila didn't alert to anything in this apartment. However, from this search, police actually took 2 boxes of clothing. They took Cuddle Cat, a pair of latex gloves, suitcases, notebooks. They took 2 of Kate's journals, and then a Bible that a friend had given them, and they also took the rented vehicle. So with this evidence, they also had Keila and Eddie go ahead and investigate this as well, and Eddie actually alerted to a box of Kate's clothing. However, it is debated whether or not that any smell of a dead body could have been on Kate anyway, because she worked in a doctor's office or in a medical setting. So the car was taken to an underground lot, and they had about 10 cars parked, and they were about 20 to 30 feet apart, and then Keila and Eddie were brought down, and they started to investigate. At this time, Eddie had alerted to the driver's door of the McCann car, and Keila alerted to the inside of the boot, or trunk. So this investigation actually led the Portuguese papers to start publishing articles about the theory Madeleine died in the apartment, and then the McCanns had just covered it up. British police were completely not going to engage in any of this newspaper theories, and they decided to just do their investigation as normal, and so they took samples from both areas in the car that Keila and Eddie had alerted to. The media reported that these samples were 100% matched to Madeleine. However, from what I could find, it is not officially concluded whether or not it was Madeleine's DNA. The Portuguese police, however, refused to drop the case against the McCanns, and on September 7th of 2007, they were officially suspects in the case. So during interrogations, Kate was told that if she confessed to Madeleine's death being an accident in the apartment, then she'd only be looking at 2 years while her husband wouldn't serve any time. Obviously, neither parent decided to turn on the other since neither has been arrested, but they had very different approaches to answering questions. So Jerry answered all the questions that police asked, while Kate refused to answer any questions. So even though they were suspects, and it is very uncommon, they were allowed to return to England, which they very quickly did on advice of legal counsel. So Portuguese police had been writing their reports saying that the McCann family was responsible for Madeleine's disappearance, saying that the dinner and the regular checks on the children were just kind of cover-ups for the murder. Kate and Jerry, obviously not wanting to give up, they instead asked a British security company called Control Risks to take hair samples from the twin boys, as they were worried that the children may have been drugged in order to keep them quiet during the abduction. Kate also submitted a sample for testing, and results were negative across the board for any kind of drugs. So somebody I have not talked about yet is our third suspect, but bear in mind the McCanns are still suspects themselves at this particular time when this third suspect was considered. So Chief Inspector Goncalo Amaral has been involved with the case since the beginning, being a very outspoken voice against the McCanns. He was, however, removed from his post October 2nd of 2007, and one of the reasons that he was removed is because of a comment he gave to the press about how the British police were only investigating leads that would exonerate the McCanns rather than doing what was best for the investigation. Amaral was actually considered a suspect low-key since day one due to his involvement in another case. This other case was about another missing person, and this was 8-year-old Joanna Cipriano. Now, this case happened in 2004, and Amaral was one of the investigators on the case. So Joanna had disappeared actually just 7 miles from Pays-de-Luz, and her body was never found, and no murder weapons were ever found either. Eventually, Joanna's mother and uncle had both confessed to killing her. However, her mother would later retract this confession, saying that she had actually been beaten into giving this confession. So Amaral was not present during this alleged beating. However, he was accused of helping to cover it up. So while the other detectives were acquitted, Amaral was actually convicted of perjury in May of 2009, receiving an 18-month suspended sentence. So going back to the McCanns as suspect. So a year after Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese police were still looking for evidence to charge the parents with child abandonment, abduction, homicide, and then concealment of a corpse. Just a few months later, the Attorney General announced that there was no evidence to connect the McCanns or Robert Murat to the abduction, so the suspect title was lifted and the case was closed, being labeled as a cold case. So Amaral actually ended up resigning from the police force in June of 2008 in order to write a book. Now this book alleged that the McCanns had killed Madeleine in the apartment, and to cover it up, they created the abduction story. So this book is called Maddie, A Verdade de Mentira, or Maddie, the Truth of the Lie, and published just a few days after the closing of the case. So by November of that same year, 2008, over 180,000 copies had been sold, and then by 2010 it had been translated into 6 languages. There were also then documentaries made based off of the book, and one in particular had gotten 2.2 million views. Obviously, the McCanns did not take kindly to the book and actually initiated a libel lawsuit against Amaral and the publisher. So the lawsuit began in 2009, and Madeleine's fund actually covered the legal cost, and then this lawsuit ended in 2015 when the McCanns were awarded €600,000 in libel damages. In the 2009 case, the judge had banned the sale of the books. However, this decision ended up being overturned in 2010, calling it a violation of freedom of expression. However, the ban was once again put in place in 2015 as part of another libel hearing, but this was also overturned in 2016 when Amaral won the appeal to the libel case. The McCanns then filed their own appeal in 2016, taking it to the Supreme Court. However, in 2017, the Supreme Court ruled against them, stating that just because the case was closed and archived didn't mean they were no longer suspects. This was the final appeal that the McCanns submitted. So let's talk more about the Madeleine Fund. So the fund was started shortly after her disappearance, and it raised millions of pounds within a few months. And it was thanks to the popularity of the website where the fund was located that celebrities started doing public pleas to help find Madeleine, and these were being aired during football matches. The fund did not cover the initial legal fees when the McCanns were first suspected. However, many people did take issue with the fact that the Madeleine Fund was used to pay off the McCanns' mortgages during that time. However, Madeleine's fund also paid for private investigators, and these investigators even went to North America, where there had been 4 reported sightings of Madeleine. And then after nothing conclusive was found there, another 35 investigators were hired to work through Europe and Morocco for any leads. However, this particular partnership did come to an end after the head of the private investigator agency stated publicly that they knew who had done it and how he had done it. Obviously, they didn't. The next company hired with the fund was Oakley International, and the main investigator was Henry Exton, who was a former officer with MI5. He had sent investigators on undercover operations into the resort where the McCanns were staying at. He even sent them into pedophile rings, and then he himself actually focused on the eyewitness accounts of the man carrying the child. Like most other investigators, he discarded Tanner's sighting, but he did focus on the sighting by Martin and Mary Smith. So the 3 of them actually worked on a sketch of the man, which led to this sketch. And when Exton later saw Jerry exit a plane with one of his sons in his arms, he thought that he recognized him as the man from the sketch. He did later accept that he was likely wrong due to the several people that could alibi Jerry at the time of the sighting. The most recent suspect is Christian Buckner, also just known as Christian B, and the inquiry into him actually began in June of 2020. And he is a convicted sex offender who is believed to have been living in the area at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. So somebody claiming to be Christian's girlfriend at the time stated that the night before the abduction, Christian had mentioned he had a job in Preludes the next day, something he wasn't looking forward to, but something he had to do. The day after Madeleine's disappearance, Christian's car was sold and registered to a new owner. Unfortunately, due to Christian's history of child sexual assault and drug trafficking charges, the police started the investigation under the assumption that Madeleine is no longer alive. He was convicted of rape of a 72-year-old woman in 2019, and his release date isn't until September of 2025. This year, in 2023, there have been searches done on a peninsula near Arde Dam, which is about 31 miles from where Madeleine was last seen, and in 2008, police found a child's sock in the area, but nothing more had been released on that investigation. The theory is that Christian killed Madeleine at the dam and threw her body into the water. So that's all I have for you today. Unfortunately, it is unsolved, but they have been doing more searches this year specifically, so maybe we're gonna get some more information, and it would be unfortunate if we find Madeleine's body. However, it would be closure that the family does need and that the world does need. There are plenty of other missing children out there, so if we could find any sort of closure, that would be amazing. You can still donate to Madeleine's Fund. I will definitely link that down in the comments down below if you want to do that. But other than that, I don't have anything else for you today. I know that was a little bit heavy of a case, but it was really interesting to research. I didn't really know most of the facts. I'd kind of heard that Madeleine had disappeared and that it was in Portugal, and there was the theories of maybe it was sex trafficking, maybe it was just human trafficking, you know? But I didn't know all the details of that night, and it is really sad because at the end of the day, that little girl is missing or gone, and that's just what it is. So, on that cheerful note, I do have some fun episodes coming up. I'm going to be talking about, I want to say Indiana next week for cryptids, but I definitely could be wrong. And then I also have Misheard Histories coming up, and they're more Christmassy. And then coming up really soon, I'm going to be starting my 12 days of Killmas. So if you're interested in that, it's going to be 3 more Christmassy related ones. I'm going to be talking about the creatures of Christmas. I'm going to be talking about Christmas stories or tales, and then I'm going to be reading 'Twas the Night Before Christmas on Christmas Eve. And then I have 9 true crime cases that are related to Christmas, whether they happened on Christmas, like by a Santa Claus, that kind of thing. So definitely look out for that. I'm gonna do my 12 days of Killmas, and then of course I have all my regularly planned Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday content. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, I'd definitely say subscribe and look out for it. And if you liked the video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. If you didn't, go ahead and dislike the video and tell me what you think I could improve in the comments. I do love some constructive criticism as long as it isn't cruel. And with that being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!